Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on Wintertooth Crown playing as the Skaven against the forces of the Vampire Counts. And this is one of those matchups that's really, in my opinion, tough for the Skaven. Skaven, as I've already said before in some of my videos and ranted about it a good bit, are in my opinion the worst faction in the game, by far. They have matchups that are outright, in my opinion, unwinnable if your opponent knows what they're doing. And there's several matchups they struggle with, and then some matchups that are just mediocre. But regardless, I don't think they're a very good faction at the moment. Very desperately need their regiments around. But Vampire Counts, much like with Beastmen, is very tough for the Skaven in large part just because of their leadership issues. They don't have, well, obviously they don't have the greatest survivability. Their infantry lines tend to buckle very easily to fear and terror. They're very susceptible to heavy cavalry, which is similar to Beastmen. They don't really have the best units with mass to really hold down big monsters, and they kind of struggle. They kind of struggle to win that sustained engagement. They kind of rely on numbers to sort of grind your opponent down and artillery to grind your opponent down, and those are all things Vampire Counts counter relatively effectively. So I tried to make a build here that is not reliant on any shooting, and was more reliant on, say, single models and infantry to try to take on the Vampire Counts. And obviously, this build is actually, I do believe, tournament legal, so I was trying to keep things a little more balanced, a little more well-rounded, wasn't trying to go full min-max, and figured, you know, it could work. So for my Lord, I decided to roll with Lord Skrulk. I think he's by far the most consistent and most reliable Skaven Lord. Basically, everyone agrees. There's not much to say there. I did bring him with Liber Bonicus, Rod of Corruption, Stand Your Ground, Pestilent Birth to get those Plague Monks, Vermintide, just in case I need to summon up some cover for a little bit, Wither, because this is a big thing in my opinion in this matchup, because generally your opponent with Vampire Counts, in my experience, will bring a lot of Graveguard. Graveguard will trash Plague Monks, and they trade rather well with Storm Vermin and Plague Monk Censer Bearers, especially in Protracted Grind. And of course, Storm Vermin aren't immune to psychology. Plague Monk Censer Bearers are incredibly squishy and susceptible to cav charges and very expensive. So in my opinion, Plague Monks are the ideal way to go if you can make it, and Wither really lets him fight Graveguard, which is one of the big threats otherwise. And finally, we do have Pestilent Breath, which does give us a little bit of magic damage in case we need to deal with ethereal units, or in case we need to clear up chaff and that sort of stuff. Alongside him, we do have a Plague Priest on a Plague Furnace, no equipment, no bells and whistles, but a decent pick here, because the Mortis Engine effect means that I can sort of whittle down my opponent's HP, slowly but surely kind of Mortis Engine him down, and prevent my opponent from healing through everything, and just having a healing death ball. Behind that, 4 units of Plague Monks. These guys, of course, are going to be dishing out the hurt to the enemy main line, and 2 Help Hit Abominations to provide some anti-large, to provide some additional anti-infantry power, but mostly just to zone out things like Mortis Engines, chase off large targets, and all that sort of stuff. 2 Skaven Slaves on the front line to provide some soaking, and then 2 Stormmen in the back. And these guys are there so that if my opponent comes in from the flanks, which is rather likely or very possible, Skaven, of course, being very mobile, it's pretty usually going to happen, the Stormmen can be ready to sort of deflect that attack. And that's basically their sole purpose. If my opponent busts through my front line, they can also plug up gaps, prevent my opponent from chasing, and that sort of stuff. Now for my opponent, he did decide to go with a very wide and somewhat interesting build, I would say. Front line of Graveguard, like I said, these guys incredibly potent in this matchup. They trade super well with Plague Monks when Plague Monks don't get buffs or upgrades. They do rather well against Censer Bearers, and they do rather well against Stormmen Halberds even. They're a very, very solid unit in my opinion. Definitely if you're playing as Vampire Counts, bring Graveguard. But behind them, a bunch of Skeleton Warriors and Skeleton Spears. So this is a bit interesting. I would actually suggest these guys be in the front to soak up charges and that sort of stuff, but my opponent perhaps looking to use them to stiffen up the line or deny large monsters like Rat Ogres or units like that. Kept them in the back. As well as 2 Cryptars here to provide some mass and some poison and some AP, so definitely a pretty potent unit there. Vargulf, Fear, Terror, of course, brutal for the Skaven. And Vargulfs are also not bad at shutting down things like Plague Priests on Plague Furnaces. They can kind of beat them down in melee. Vladdy Daddy is over here, and he's got his Master Beguilement. These guys are Dark Grandeur. He's got Invocation of the Heck as well as Raised Dead, though I think it's worth mentioning. This is something I criticized in one of my previous videos, but I'm going to criticize again. He's brought Blood Drinker, and he didn't bring the Karstein Ring. Guys, if you're playing Vlad and you can only afford to bring one of his 2 items, bring the Karstein Ring. You're almost always going to hit your healing cap as Vlad on Karstein. It's almost always going to happen. And because he's already got the Hunger built in, he's got his buffs from Invocation of the Heck, it's very rare that you don't hit your healing cap. the 90% resist is much more useful in my opinion. There's a lot more situations where that can come into play, and if you time it correctly, you can really save your own bacon. Whereas, like, the Blood Drinker just doesn't really come, in my opinion, have much of an effect. Finally, on one flank, my opponent does have Blood Knights, a brutal unit who can really probably dumpster even the Helped Abominations if they get into close quarters and manage to surround it. And on the other flank, some Dire Wolves. So definitely some solid punch. Not a lot of Cav, which is a pretty common sight in this matchup, but nonetheless, a pretty powerful build. So you can see immediately we are going to push in with our Plague Priest, try to disrupt this graveyard. You can see we've already taken off about 500 HP, and we're draining these guys. We've got our Mortis Engine effect going against all these troops, and we don't really have to worry about these Skaven and Slaves, or these Skeleton Spears, or any of that sort of stuff. You can see I did actually pull my Skaven Slaves back, because I didn't want them disrupting my the charge of my Plague Monks, and I didn't really see much of a purpose here. The graveyard doesn't have much charge, so there's nothing to really break up. Now, immediately I'm going to focus on the Sternsman, trying to take out this very dangerous unit as quickly as I can, and perhaps force my opponent's hand, try to get him to commit here. While over here we do drop a Wither, and that's going to debuff the graveyard down to 30 armor, and suddenly the Plague Monks are trading much more effectively, which is really important for me. In the meantime, you can see my opponent is going to drop an Invocation of the Heck over here, which means it's not going down over here, and you can see our Plague Priest just melting these troops, constantly melting these Skeleton Warriors and Skeleton Spears and all that sort of stuff. And here in the pits, the Helped Abomination, you know, slugging it out with the Crypt Horrors. It's getting poisoned, which is a little unfortunate. Its anti-large bonus isn't the best, it's only 18, but it's able to do some slow but steady work and kind of prevent these Crypt Horrors from just mulching my Plague Monks too efficiently. Unfortunately, he's getting a little sidetracked here by the Graveyard. Now, over on the flanks, you can see we're going to throw our Skaven Slaves in against the Skeleton Warriors. Now, this is something that is an incredibly effective way, in my opinion, to use Skaven Slaves. If you can get them in against the cheap, lower-end infantry, like, especially Skeleton Warriors are an ideal example of this, but there's other examples too, like even Clan Rats, or Miners, or Dwarf Warriors, or Goblins. Because of their respectable melee defense, these guys will actually hold really well. If my opponent had charged me here with the Blood Knights, he might have been able to break this very quickly, but as it is, these guys will hold out very long against the Skeleton Warriors and trade rather well. Elsewhere, you can see the Plague Furnace still just melting all these troops. The Dire Wolves having a horrible time of it. Unfortunately, my Plague Monks here are going to rout and flee. My opponent doesn't run them down, though, which has been a mistake on my part. Over here, though, you can see that deployment of the Stormvermin shielding the back, preventing these guys from getting a nice charge into the background. Over here, in the meantime, Lord Skrulk and his Helped Abomination merrily smashing their way through these Crypt Horrors. Over here, my opponent did force a rout with the Skaven Slaves, but they're Skaven Slaves, so nobody cares. You can see they actually left a sizable dent in the Skeleton Warriors, which, given how cheap of it, these guys are 125 gold units, so all things considered, decent performance. Elsewhere in the meantime, is Clan Rats summons slugging out with Skeleton Spears. Clan Rats, they'll do okay against Skeleton Spears. Blood Knights here are going to get a meaty rear charge into the back of my Stormvermin, but they are going to be drained continuously by the Plague Furnace, and my opponent is definitely not in a great spot here because of the blobbing situation here. He's going to be getting drained constantly by this Plague Furnace, which is really not what he wants in life. The Plague Monks over here are going to get routed off, and now the line, you know, it's buckling. I've got Plague Monks all the way out here, which is really out of position, not really set up to fight. These Plague Monks routed. Over here, these Clan Rats that I summoned routed. But we are able to flex our Stormmen over to the flank. They are relatively mobile for a Halberd unit. These guys are legitimately one of the worst Halberd units in the entire game, but their mobility is nice. I've tried to look for a nice spin on that, but the mobility is nice. And with the leadership buffs coming in from the Plague Priest, we're able to kind of keep this line intact and fighting. In the meantime, over here we've wiped out the Sternsmen, essentially. They're down to their last models. And now we're going to be able to start piling through. You can see Plague Monk Summon coming in from behind, destroying these Skeleton Spears very efficiently. Over here, Lord Skrulk slugging out with the Skeleton Warriors and just able to slowly but surely drain them down, despite Invocation of Neck going down. My opponent just isn't able to hold down. Crypt Horror is trying to get in here and deal with the Plague Priest, but really too little too late. The drain effect, you can see over here, I actually do get my Rod of Corruption down. Over here, I do hit the Vargul with Liber Bonicus. This was probably a bit of a mistake. I probably should have used it on the Blood Knights, but, you know, hindsight's 20/20. I didn't want to use it on Vlad because I wasn't sure what abilities he had, and I figured I'm not going to be able to snipe him anyway, so screw that. Let's deal with the Varguls and the more threatening units. Over here, the Help Pit still tying down these Graveguard as well as the Crypt Horrors. Not exactly cost effective there, but hey, he tries. You can see he's not taking too much damage. It's pretty tanky. Over here, though, basically full HP Help and Abomination. Plague Monk's able to now start collapsing inward. And one little thing I didn't want to bring attention to is just how well this fight's going for the Skaven Slave Spears. Now, certainly once their strength in numbers dissipates, which would happen soon, they're at 3,600 of their 6,400 HP, so in like 400 HP they lose that, they're going to fall apart. But you can see how long they've held up these Skeleton Warriors, and this is a unit that costs twice as much as they do. So it's silly, but it's one of those huge cost efficiency differences. In the meantime, though, with our Plague Priest in there, we're just melting this pocket. Skeleton Warriors just not good enough to hold. The Blood Knight's starting to fall apart. At this point, my opponent does decide to GG out of the game. So, in my opinion, the build worked well. If I had to recommend a build against Vampire Cats, this is actually something I think is legitimately functional. The Wither helps deal with Graveguard, which are a huge threat normally. Help Abominations give you some anti-large stopping power, especially alongside the Stormman. And of course, Skrulk and the Plague Priest really give you something that can melt down the infantry over time and help win that grindy fight. As you saw there, the Skaven slaves can do really well against cheap infantry, and this is something I would really recommend you guys do if you're trying to find good ways to use Skaven slaves. Zombies are another good pure target unit like this, but Skaven slaves, while you might want to use them as just cheap cannon fodder, do keep in mind that with their relatively high melee defense, as long as they've got strength and numbers up, if they're not getting rear charged, or they're not getting sort of disrupted, or they're not getting their leadership collapsed somehow, they'll stand and fight against units like Skeleton Warriors, against units like Miners, against units like Goblins for a very long time. And they can buy you a lot of time. And keep in mind, that's a very cost-effective trade. And for example, if you get 2 Skaven slaves fighting 2 Skeleton Warriors, that means you're up another 300, 400 gold somewhere else on the battlefield. It can be incredibly cost-effective. So do keep that in mind. That can be very useful. As a whole, like I said, I do think this build is relatively solid. And you can see the Plague Monks doing rather well for themselves. Certainly, the leadership breaks once the Blood Knights got into the back, and the Varghulf rampaged around was a bit of a problem, but all in all, did well. For my opponent's build, a few little criticisms. Well, first and foremost, Vlad with the Blood Drinker instead of the Karstein Ring. Personally, I don't really think in a lot of matchups, especially the Skaven matchup, I don't really think you need either of the survivability items to begin with. But if it's a choice of one or the other, I would always go with the Karstein Ring. Because let's say you're going up against a sniper, let's say your opponent's trying to snipe you, and they're focusing really hard with Lord Skrulk, and they're focusing you down with, say, Queek and a bunch of Lord heroes like that. A little bit of extra regen isn't going to save you your bacon in that situation. But being able to pop 90% damage resistance for a little bit could be huge. It's great against Empire, especially where Final Transmutation, Accusation, and Luminarch spam is not the rarest of sights. Situations like that, the Karstein Ring can just be a huge boon. But Blood Drinker, honestly, not that much. Vlad, almost, in my experience, almost always hits his healing cap. So, if the batch lasts that long. For a few other critiques here, Cryptars I don't think are really all that useful in this matchup. The fact of the matter is, Poison's okay, but the AP is really basically wasted. If your opponent goes heavy on Stormmen, maybe, but Stormmen are easier to break, in my opinion, with just Cavalry and Varghulfs. It's a straight-up fight that kind of hold relatively well. In my opinion, you want to go heavier on Cav. Dire Pack is an amazing unit choice in this matchup. Definitely something I would always recommend you bring, because they're fast enough to catch skirmishers, which is great. Mainly that bonus versus large against Skaven large is amazing, because both Helping Abominations and Rat Ogres, which are very common in this matchup, have very low armor values and relatively low melee defense. So you can get your Dire Pack in there and just tear them to shreds and do some amazing work. So that is very worth keeping in mind, I think, and definitely very useful. And yeah, that would be my main suggestion. Go more heavy on Cav, perhaps bring some Black Knights instead of the Cryptars, and bring the Dire Pack. And I think that's a much better way to go with the Vampire Counts. But regardless, good game to Memoria here. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining and hopefully a little informative. Perhaps it helps you guys with this matchup if you're struggling with it like I was for a long time. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, as usual, do not hesitate to post them down below. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.